please join our Discord channel we just set up. We have a follow-up networking opportunity where we can post like jobs, opportunities. We're gonna also share like news happening in the latest emerging tech world. So this is like a great way to meet online, virtually, but we also have an opportunity to meet in person right after the event. We have just like 100 feet away over there, we have like a food and drink that you can order and kind of hang out there. So, before we officially get started, I'm gonna share what happened since last meetup. Actually, who was here last time? Whoa, mostly new people are here early, okay. Great. Let me see. Okay, so I'm just going to show different things that happened since March 1st is, I think, when we had the first meetup. And let's see if it has some music. This is a Coca-Cola commercial. And what's interesting about this commercial is that they incorporated the traditional like a filming 3D, but also using stable diffusion on some of the parts. So it's kind of cool to see like a big corporations experimenting with. I think this is a stable diffusion part where like it generates the image. So that's how we film. This is probably 3D part, but then I think this part might be stable diffusion. But it's pretty cool that companies are taking these things seriously. I think it used to be that companies take a long time to get to these cool emerging tech, but it's really cool to see. Okay, I'll post this on Slack. Sorry, not Slack, Discord, so you can see it later. And since last time, GPT-4 was announced by the Sam Altman. Have you played with the GPT-4 or ChatGPT so far? Yep, okay, yeah, it's pretty powerful. It takes way longer than ChatGPT. I think on average, when I was playing, it takes like maybe 30, 40 seconds to respond. They stream the response, so it doesn't feel like you're waiting for a long time, but to complete, it takes a little bit longer than the ChatGPT. This is, I don't know if you can read from the distance, but I thought this was pretty interesting that you find a person in place of GPT-4, but you still have a problem. We'll see how good the GPT-4 become in terms of replacing some of us. Maybe, hopefully not, but. So this is the ChatGPT plugin. You have to have a pro subscription with the ChatGPT, $20 per month. But once you do that, make sure to fill out a plugin waitlist, so you actually have access to the plugins. What you can do with it is when you query something, instead of ChatGPT drawing answers from 2021, which is the last time it was trained on, it actually connects to a service like the Alpha. You can also connect to Expedia. Like you actually get the real-time accurate information of like booking flights or finding restaurants, or getting some technical answer from the website. So it's worth trying. And Johnny, I think, will show a little bit more. He's a first speaker. And this is another one I thought was a little funny. That we're all suddenly experts in AI really fast, right? 5 years in generative AI experience. This is going to the little bit of a hardware side, what's happening in robotics. You may have seen some like autonomous robotics that Elon Musk announced where it learns and figures out what to do without you teaching them what to do. But I thought this was pretty cool. But maybe soon some of the logistics are going to be replaced by these robots that can handle like complex tasks. It's pretty neat. This is June, which is a smart oven, and they put NVIDIA card. And what they're trying to do is using the AI to kind of detect what it is that you just put it in, and it just automatically sets the right time to cook it for. This must be pretty expensive, but it will be kind of cool to just put whatever, and then he figures out like, oh, it looks right, it's cooked right. This is another one that I thought was very interesting. you thought the person sitting in front of you is an artist drawing your portrait, but you're just entering the /imagine street style photo shot on Africa Vista. And what was interesting is that in the reply of this comic, someone actually used Midjourney 5 to actually generate the photo of the exact description of this woman in the comic. So I thought, well, that's kind of cool. This is just an announcement of Adobe Firefly. It's very smart of them to use their own stock images to generate an image based on their stock images, so they can kind of circumvent the problem with the copyright issues, because they have copyright to produce. I think artists still have to opt in, I believe, for your images to be used as a training set, but these things are moving so fast that, like, again, like our corporates used to be slow, but like now they're jumping on really fast. It's a cool phenomenon to see. They must have like some labs team that's doing a really good job adopting these technology right away. And this is another little thing I thought was very interesting. It might be a little bit hard to see, but here's a diagram that asks a question. And in using the ChatGPT, it generates follow-up questions about the topic. And then you click on, like, okay, how deep do I want to go on this topic? You just click on it, and then ChatGPT generates additional questions. It's kind of like a mind mapping done for you, which is kind of cool. I think a lot of students probably going to get a lot of use out of this. What is that? This is like someone's personal project. I can share it on the Twitter. It's not even like available for you to play with it. It's like, it's really cool that people are jumping on, doing all these personal projects, sharing their progress. But this is not a product. I'm gonna play Agent GPT, which is in the category of this thing called Auto GPT, where instead of you as a human entering prompts and then like, okay, I'm gonna fine tune my results, it's actually the GPT refining itself until it achieves the goal that you set. So you might say something like, oh, I guess the screen is kind of showing like, hey, I want to achieve this goal, and run until it achieves my goal that I want. This is very interesting feel of the GPT just even replacing human typing in the prompt. And I think this is still an experimental thing, but you can go to Agent GPT to test out how it works for you. And probably the last one, I thought, we're like, where's Apple in this? Like, we're all waiting for Apple to figure out. Like, they have the Siri, so they are clearly working on, you know, those AI assistant thing, but they haven't announced anything yet. They tend to be quiet, so where's the GPT in this whole AI party? Okay, I think we're almost up the time to start, but if you join a little bit later, please join our Discord group. This is where we are going to have a follow-up discussions, networking opportunities. And I want to mention our sponsors, Fresh Consulting and Kung Fu AI, and Strangeworks is this space. Thank you for providing a space. We have a lot of RSVP. We'll see how many people show up. There may be a lot more people showing up soon.
I guess first of all, welcome for those of you guys coming for the first time, and some of you guys welcome back to our Emerging Tech Meetup. I'm Jacob Rodriguez. I'm an innovation consultant and business development manager at Fresh Consulting. This is now our second monthly meetup. So if you missed the first one, you can rewatch that session online. We are on YouTube, and you can search Austin Emerging Tech Meetup to find that last month's video. On that topic, we are also in progress of building a new website to contain some more videos and discussion. So let's go over some quick housekeeping items. We have a hard stop at the end of this event, so we're asking everybody, and I think you guys saw it in the invite, to migrate over to the Luster Pearl, which is like literally right around the corner, for some more networking and some discussion. Parking. Parking's here at the building, and we also have parking that we know is safe here on the street. So just letting you guys know, if you need to move cars, the street and the building is okay to park. You guys can probably see here beside me, we got a Discord QR code. So we started a Discord channel. If you haven't scanned it, I highly recommend that you scan it and join. We also have a survey that we will share. Let's see, do we have it on the next slide here? Yep. We've got a survey. It takes 3 minutes to fill out. It just helps us improve the focus of these meetings and to find new speakers and sponsors. So if you can take a second or two to fill that out, that'd be great. FY, there are some cameras and some photos, and we're going to be taking some video and camera throughout the event. And for the fun part, today you guys are going to hear 2 wonderful talks. First one's going to be by Johnny Rodriguez on practical business applications for GPT-4. And then our second will be by Dr. Joseph Gartner on the AI's role in closing the health equality gap. At the end of their speaking, we're going to allow you guys about 5-7 minutes to have a quick Q&A to ask any questions. So yeah, and last thing, I think I mentioned to you, restrooms are going to be here to my left if you need to head into the restroom. One last thing, we actually we had, I think, double the registrations that we had last month, so we ask if you guys can squeeze in as we get more people. That'd be great, and just make space for your peers out here. And yeah, we'll go ahead and start getting into a quick introduction to Mr. Johnny Rodriguez here next to me, who will be speaking on the practical business application of GPT-4. Johnny Rodriguez is the Director of Innovation at Fresh Consulting. He's got over 18 years of experience and has created countless innovative products and experiences in the emerging tech space, such as XR, AR, VR, generative AI, the metaverse, and other technologies. He also co-leads Fresh Labs, which is a team that is dedicated to exploring and testing, building, and pushing the boundaries of emerging tech. Johnny's also the co-founder of Brancher AI, a no-code platform that allows the connection of AI models to build AI apps in minutes. And without further ado, let's give it up for Johnny.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you all for being here today. If you can't hear me, just like point at your ear, and sometimes I start talking like this. So, comes with more practice. Thank you all for being here. Yes, this is our second meetup, so we're really excited to get into some big topics. Obviously, so if you were here at the beginning, you probably saw Elisha come up and talk through a lot of the things that happened in the last month. It's insane. This is a crazy time in the world. It's really exciting for me as like a emerging tech fanboy. Honestly, that maybe something to add to my introduction. It was a pretty crazy month of March. There's a bunch of stuff on here. Yes, I included things like ChatGPT made South Park, some pop culture things, but we have some big things that happen here, like Adobe announcing Firefly. If you've been watching Runway, Gen 2, where they're starting to take and transfer styles into videos. There's actually been stuff in the last week that I didn't even put in here. This is just in the month of April. Canva, Google, Microsoft, tons and tons of things happening. It's been really, really fascinating and lots happening. One of the big things that happened in the last month was that GPT-4 came out. So there's been a lot of questions of like, what do we do with it, right? I know at our organization, so we work at Fresh Consulting, our team specifically is called Fresh Labs, and we focus on emerging technologies, as Jacob talked about. So we're in this space, we're learning about things, we're educating, we're building with it. And we have a lot of companies asking us, should we be paying attention to this? What part should we be paying attention to? Should we be paying attention to it now? Should we think about it in the future? And we're starting to get lots and lots of companies saying, hey, we're ready to integrate. And how? How does that work? So this is the topic that I think is interesting to a lot of people. I know a year ago, the same month, a year ago, I was giving a talk on practical applications of the metaverse, right? That terminology seems so outdated now, right? But we're still involved with it, we're still learning, we're still building with it, but it's crazy how quick this technology moves and evolves. So today we are talking about practical business applications for GPT-4. And to get into that, so this is just a little bit of my background. What you'll see throughout the presentation, by the way, is I added this little icon. And you'll see this icon. Every time I use generative AI as part of my presentation, you're going to see that little icon there. It doesn't mean that it did the work for me. Sometimes I feel like, well, that's kind of lazy. But no, it's helping, it's augmenting, it's maybe a starting point of maybe thinking through initial ideas and then I kind of refine, or it's been improving my language. I think like historically, I've always told people, I can do all these things, right? I'm really grateful that I have the ability to do this, this, and this. But man, my copywriting is just terrible. And now all of a sudden, people are like, wow, your emails are so professional. What's going on here? So like a lot of us, leveraging GPT, ChatGPT specifically, or leveraging some of these cool plugins and things happening, starting to add a lot of value. So for example, there on the left, I was actually standing in front of my garage before church one day, took a selfie, and then I brought it into DALL-E, and then I replaced the background, and then if I go back one, I added this cool little thing in my pocket that I don't actually have, right? Extended my tie, extended my shoulders and my shirt, and I got this professional photograph that I can actually use that I took while my kids were screaming and right in front of my garage. And on the right, I just copy pasted my LinkedIn and I said, generate me a bio. And so that's what you're seeing up here. So again, anywhere you see that, that means generative AI LLMs were used as part of kind of the planning and preparation of this presentation. So how have I leveraged GPT specifically? You guys heard Brancher.ai. It's a platform so with all this stuff happening, right? I mean, I think even with GPT-3, prior to ChatGPT, I was starting to build with it, putting it into spreadsheets and doing some cool things. But it wasn't until ChatGPT, like the rest of the world, November comes around and it's like this killer use case of a natural language chat that really brought all the hype. Fastest growth to 100 million users ever, all time. Like, we're experiencing that right now. This technology is reaching masses and masses of people. We heard about it. We started wanting to building that. So Elisha earlier, who was presenting, he presented last month. He and I co-lead this team, right? And so we saw an opportunity to build something. We said, wow, there's a lot of cool LLMs and all these little, all these generative AI models. What if we could tie these things together and make it really easy and make it something that's a no-code way to kind of leverage these tools? So we ended up building, I mean, there's definitely some more to that origin story, but we developed Brancher.ai, won a hackathon from that, and we have currently about 50,000 users, a bunch of people leveraging that for different use cases. It is a little bit of a shameless plug, but it's just an element to say like, hey, we are building with this technology. And the NBA team, the San Antonio Spurs, we built FanGPT. So if you went to one of their last few home games, you might have seen a kiosk that said FanGPT, and we trained their knowledge base. We trained the vendors and the food at these vendors so that somebody could come in and type it. Lots of learnings from that, right? Typing in a really clunky keyboard isn't like the best interface. So there's like a lot of learning. We're trying to help develop some best practices, put together some UX principles around leveraging the technology, and we're learning a lot from that. But just another example of something that I've been a part of. 25 apps, games, and experience. So when ChatGPT, well, I put here, hey, I built a few apps last year. Oh, not 2020, that wasn't a thing. That's 2022. Or sorry, yeah, 2022. Anyway, 7 productivity acts of Chrome extensions. So ChatGPT becomes available, and then I was like, wait, you can code things? And I'm a developer and a designer, so I thought, let me see how good this thing is. Well, what are the things that I constantly find myself doing before calls, like prepping for calls or prepping for meetings? So I ended up building one Chrome extension the first 7 days that ChatGPT was available, and I still use those to this day. And I've built tons of apps and games and experiences, so when I see these cool things like, hey, we made a Pong, or hey, we made a Snake, I'm often thinking, how can I make a game that does both? And then I kind of combine them and play with them. So it's been something I've played around with. But I think number 4 is kind of the biggest thing, and I think maybe some of you, maybe a lot of you are thinking about like, how can it help me reduce cognitive load? How can I be more effective in my job? How can I get a competitive advantage? It's kind of the point of our meetup, actually, to talk about like, hey, as business professionals, how can we get a competitive advantage at work? Not like in comparison to other coworkers, but just like we all want that extra lift. I know that I needed that. And I think I've analyzed and I'm about 20-30% more, I guess that reduction in cognitive load as I leverage ChatGPT and things like that. And you're gonna see some of the ways that I use it. Probably if you go onto Twitter and things like that, you'll see other examples of this and things like that. But I'm hoping to do some things, share some things that might be a little bit different than what you might have seen, because everyone kind of sees like oh, cool, you made an app. And I'm not gonna really show those. I wanna kind of think through a little bit out of the box of ways that it could be leveraged, maybe that you have or haven't thought about. So as we get into GPT-4, let's talk about just a little bit of overview. I am making a big assumption here that everyone in the room has heard of GPT-4, has played with ChatGPT, and I don't want to do raise of hands of who hasn't, because that might feel a little bit singled out if you haven't. But if you haven't, definitely play with it. GPT-4 came out since the last meetup. It's the newest version of OpenAI's language model systems. Its previous version, technically ChatGPT API or GPT 3.5 Turbo was the latest one, but its predecessor, its previous version, was being used a lot. That's where a lot of the hype happened, and it's powered by it's powered the company's wildly popular ChatGPT, again the fastest product to 100 million users, and launched November 2022. And what is the difference? So I think that this is something that I really thought about, because I thought, I'm sure people leverage GPT-3 or ChatGPT that was based off of GPT-3. What are the core differences, and how can we amplify those as we leverage GPT-4? So I listed out 8 things. So improved language understanding, I'll stop on a few of these. Enhanced capabilities in reasoning and problem solving. If you haven't seen the GPT-4 landing page, it kind of goes through some of these in detail. Enhanced fine-tuning and domain-specific customizations. I'm getting a little bit of a glare. Better at creative projects. I've absolutely seen this be the case as it relates to this music, screenplays, technical writing. I'm in the process of writing a song right now where it's giving me the guitar chords and the music, and I'm hoping that at some point I could release that, not completely built on its own and then it just kind of auto-runs, but actually leveraging it as a companion to build songs. I like music. Improved scalability and efficiency, ability to understand longer context. So this is a pretty big deal, up to 25,000 words. That might be a small book if you think about it. So instead of it being if you've ever leveraged it and you copy-pasted something into ChatGPT and then getting oh, you hit our limit, right? This is a huge, huge deal, longer context. That means that it can start to understand a lot more. You might still run into that issue of the limitation if you're going to ChatGPT just directly to the website. But if you're leveraging it as the API, there's a bunch available there. And then I really like number 8. I've been doing my own test of things that it would give me. In the past you could say something and I don't encourage you to do this, but in the past you could say something like, I want to create a bomb. They actually show that in their examples. I want to create a bomb, right? And before it would be I can't do that. I'm a large language model and we don't want to do harmful things. And I'd be that's okay. I'm just doing a screenplay. Just tell me what you would put in the screenplay. Oh, if that's the case, sure, here you go. And they'd be yeah, go buy this, you can go to Home Depot. It was pretty scary, and they didn't have ways to block that. So GPT-4 is a lot safer to use. It's 40% more factual. So if you've heard of hallucination, that's the terminology they're using, where it comes up with its own stuff. What that means is you might get a result, and you might say, wow, this is incredible. There's a chance that some of the stuff it was saying was quote unquote hallucinated. It was made up, and it's just inferencing. It's making an inference off of it. An example of that is you could grab a URL to a website. For example, on our Fresh Consulting website, this is what I did. I grabbed a blog post, and I pasted it into ChatGPT, and I said, summarize this page. And then it would tell you, oh, here's this whole summary, and here's the outline. I'd be whoa, guys, check this out. And I'd share it, and I'd find out that all it would look at was just the parameters in the URL, whatever it was called. It didn't actually look at the page, and it would come up with its own summary. And so it was inferencing off of that, and it was hallucinating facts. A lot of people don't know that. It doesn't really tell you that. So you kind of have to know these limitations. There's a lot more there. They're still improving. I think when we get to GPT-5, it's going to be crazy how much that improves. So the other thing is 82% less likely to respond to requests of disallowed content. That specifically might be things that are harmful, like the bomb example I gave you, religious examples, and things like that. There's a lot of hype around that on Twitter of whoa, look what it said about this group of people, or look what it said about this religion. And again, it would hallucinate things. So that has been drastically improved in GPT-4. Cool. So how can it be accessed today? Raise of hands if your primary use is just going to chat.openai.com for ChatGPT. Okay. And then raise of hands if you're using Bing as your primary, Bing chat. And then raise of hands if you're using something different for GPT-4. Wow, no, okay, a few people. Cool. Over here, great. Yeah, I've got 2 people that use it outside of it. So there's a few different ways. A lot of people don't know you can just go to ai.com. That must have been expensive to buy, by the way. They bought ai.com and it redirects over to chat.openai.com. openai.com. If you pay the $20 a month, I have no connection, by the way, but it costs $20 a month to get the pro version. It's limited to 25 messages every 3 hours, and then this is the part that you don't know, is 100 messages every 4 hours. So it does have some hard limitations. I run into those every day, so that's a little bit frustrating. Microsoft Bing Chat, so it's called Bing Chat. I think I've heard Bing AI or Microsoft AI. It's officially called Microsoft Bing Chat, I guess. They need to get a better branded name for that, I think. But you can run that through Microsoft Edge browser. It is free to use, but it's highly limited. And they kind of revealed recently, oh, by the way, we've been running off of GPT-4 this whole time. We didn't tell you that, right? That was something that actually came out. It's like, oh, well, that explains it. The biggest advantage is that it's connected to the web. And that has changed with plugins, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, but Microsoft Bing Chat is really, really powerful. It is limited to 15 chats per session at 150 sessions per day. Just good to know. If you run out of them and you want to go somewhere else, go to Microsoft if you're on ChatGPT or vice versa, right? And then the last one is, I guess there's a few others. Third one here is just going through the API. If you aren't a developer, that may be less available for you, but it costs 3 cents for every 1,000 prompt tokens, and that has a translation to words. Yeah, so there's a translation from prompt tokens to words. So 32,000 tokens equals 25,000 words. I don't like that they don't just tell you in words, by the way. They just tell you in words. But anyway, 32,000 tokens, that's the higher end, and that's 6 cents for that 32,000 tokens, those 25,000 words. You're sending it a book, basically, or a smaller book. But it can actually be a little bit more affordable building it in your own way. And there's a lot of apps that are out there where it's like, bring your own API key, BYO API. Bring your own API. You paste your API key, and then now you can leverage it within that tool. And there's a few examples of that. I put here like po.com has some as a really good one where you can build your own chatbot and give it its own context. You can share it. They have limitations and have paid versions of this. Aura.sh, Hugging Face Transformers, AI Dungeon. But basically 1, 2, and 3 would be the kind of core ways of leveraging and interfacing with the chat version of GPT-4. So let's dive into this. Practical applications, business applications. So I do want to poll a little bit. I don't have it in my slides to poll, but I want to ask, how many of you use ChatGPT for your business, for business use cases professionally every day? Let's say in the last 2 weeks you've used it every day. That's pretty crazy to have a product come out of nowhere like this, right? And say, oh yeah, this is just a part of my daily life now. Pretty insane. So there's a lot of us that may not do that, maybe using it, and you're thinking about how can I leverage it? So hopefully this hopefully starts to connect some dots for you as you start thinking about ways to leverage ChatGPT. So number one is advanced document summarization. And I think the way people think about this today is a copy paste. Let me copy paste this. High level, there is an opportunity here to summarize complex reports. So it can be in chart formats, so not just in text format, articles and contracts. Vision is available. When they talk about GPT-4 being multimodal, it means that they're not just looking at text, they can actually look at images. Microsoft Bing Chat has the ability to see the charts on the page. So there's a huge advantage to leveraging that. So if I go to the next slide here, this is an example. This is Fresh Consulting. I wrote a blog article in 2020 talking about chatbots. And I was talking about some cool things, considerations, design and development implementations. So if you open this in Microsoft Edge, and you just hit literally this little icon on the top right, and then you say generate page takeaways in 10 key points. And the 10 key points is really key for this, because if you don't, you'll get a single paragraph output. If you say give me 10 key points, it usually gives you a robust sentence, and it gives you 10 things that stand out. And it's really, really powerful. I can't tell you how many times I get a document now where I just run that. And that becomes really, really powerful to help me. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't read the articles, but it's a good way to summarize. It's like you're new, if you remember being in school and doing Cliff Notes, and you're like, oh man, I didn't have time to read the book. There is an opportunity to help with this, right? To either getting a starting point or reminding yourself about this. A lot of times I'll leverage that. People will ask me, what are some like official documents and white papers on this particular topic, and I'll go and find them, and then some of them are like 100 pages, and I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I'm gonna, like, for me to get an answer on these 10 documents would be really hard. Now, I can open it, run it, open it, run it, and it's really, really powerful the way you can kind of leverage that. So that was off of a blog. It works, like I said, with imagery. So this is a thing about the metaverse that I read all the way from start to finish, probably 100 different sources on this, but I read this one from Deloitte, and it took me a really long time. And now I can just hit the button and summarize, and then I get some of the insightful things to say, okay, yeah, this is worth reading, or hey, maybe I want to save this for later. And lastly, this is an interesting way. So sometimes you get a Google Doc. Maybe if you're using Microsoft, very soon you'll be able to just do it natively. Google will do something very similar. But today, I want to focus on what's available today, right? You can take your Google Doc. This was my draft for my talk, and I was putting bullet points and things like that. And I turned it into a PDF, and I dragged that into a new tab in Microsoft Edge, and now it sees it as a PDF, and then I can say summarize. So Google Doc, if you try to go do that, they don't want to like play nicely with Google, right? Oh, sorry, we can't read the contents of this Google Doc. So if you give it a PDF, a little bit of a secret there. So again, coming back to this, there's just a high level increased accuracy of understanding of the context of these documents. So it's a page, it's a PDF, it's charts, it's lots of information. So that might help you as it relates to summarizing, yes, summarization, but also research that you might be doing, competitive research and things like that. Another one, this is enhanced email drafting. So again, early on it was copy paste, like summarize, how do I answer this, make it this style, and it was a little bit clunkier. The capabilities of it today are pretty powerful, and it's becoming even more powerful. And honestly, by the time you watch this next month, it's going to be outdated. It's going to be outdated because we're going to get it probably in Google Workspace. You're going to get it in Microsoft 365. It's going to be integrated to the tools that we use on an everyday basis. But today, it can help you draft very persuasive, concise, error-free emails. It can tailor it to various recipients. You can save time and improve communications of the quality, better response, and impression. I want to give you a real example here. See if this will work. Maybe. There we go. This is me going into ChatGPT+, and I have my plugins turned on. So if you didn't watch that, let me pause for just a second. Plugins are a big deal if you haven't heard about them. ChatGPT has plugins now, which means, yes, it can connect to the web, and there's a lot of power coming there. But what it means is that if you have something like Zapier, which connects to 30,000 different sources, including my calendar, my Gmail, my Slack, almost every tool that I use is built into that. I can just hit the drop down in plugins and say, hey, yeah, let's enable Zapier for this, right? So now I can say, what's my latest email from Kang, who's a coworker of mine? And then it goes and hits Zapier, and I'm not even leaving ChatGPT right now, right? And it's going to go run this. Actually, let me give you a little speed up version of this. See if it'll speed up. There we go. Maybe. All right, here's the email. This is the email he mentioned. I'm going to kind of fast forward through this a little bit. And I said, great, draft an email and let him know that the PTO was approved. Drafts it for me, and I get a link to approve it, right? So like instead of me doing this copy paste thing, it's built in, right into ChatGPT. Super powerful stuff there with ChatGPT. And that's like a pretty basic one, but I think you're going to start to see more and more power, like I said, built into the tools that you already love and use. I use it a lot for here, number 3, pre-meeting preparations. I happen to get invited to meetings sometimes that I don't get a lot of context to, but I know that it involves my team. And sometimes I'm like 2 minutes before a call thinking about, what am I going to do here? I want to understand who I'm meeting with, or what this company does, or how we can actually leverage emerging technologies for them. So I sometimes start here. This is a friend of ours. He's deep in the AR space. I said, hey, I work for Fresh Consulting in Bellevue, Washington, and I'm about to meet with, and I have the wrong screenshot in here. Yeah, this is the wrong screenshot. This is for the next page. But the idea is that you go into ChatGPT and say, hey, I'm about to meet with this guy named Tom. Here's his about bio and his background from LinkedIn. Can you tell me what this person does? And can you give me 5 points that I can have of discussion at the beginning of the call? And it'll tell me, and I actually did this with him on my first call. And I said, and it just said, oh, you guys might overlap in his love for XR. And by the way, he was a leader for Eighth Wall, which was acquired by Niantic. And if you give it your own LinkedIn, it might actually tell you your overlap. Hey, you guys are both in the XR space. Hey, you guys have both done VR and AR, things like that. And it starts to kind of connect some of those dots for you.
When you're talking about like giving it to them, are you talking about links or actually need to paste in like the content from those LinkedIn pages?
Yeah, so the question is, do you have to paste the content in or is it directly in there? It's not built into LinkedIn yet. They have announced that it will be built in. A lot of different features will be built in. Right now, it's a copy-paste. And I don't have Zapier connected to LinkedIn, so I don't get to use that natively. But that's what that means. Same thing happens with companies, though. And I have Strangeworks on here just as an example. Hey, this is who we are. This is who they are. What services can we offer? And it came back, and this is just an embed here where it tells you, okay, cool. Hey, here's UX, here's software, here's cloud services. And I can say, no, I'm looking at emerging technology, specifically generative AI. How can I leverage generative AI with this company? And it'll help you start a draft, a good starting discussion. So lots of power in doing some of that. Quickly drafting business proposals. I literally did this like 3 or 4 hours ago. Our team will see this. Hey, we got to put this draft proposal together. We need to follow this particular format. This is all the one-page format on the right. This isn't a real client, by the way, just because I didn't want to show real stuff here. But here's our one-page document. Here's what our opportunity summary is, proposed summary, key activities, key deliverables. And I just put that into ChatGPT and I said, hey, I'm writing a proposal and I want you to follow the examples below for the company. But I'm doing this for Google Inc. for a UX design project around their new Google Glass product. This isn't a real thing. I think we'll need 5 team members and we'll need to execute this in 9 weeks at a rate of 195. And then I pasted the example and then I got back here you go. And my delta between what the output was versus what we could send to the client is sometimes in like the less than 10% change, right? It's really creative and you can just kind of conversationally update it. So definitely a use case there. We're going to start to see things where it'll integrate directly, where it'll just give me the Google Doc, right? That could be a plugin very soon. It just gives you the Google Doc in the right format, or it can give it to you in formats that can be ingested into cool tools like Google Doc. So it could be like in a CSV format or in a JSON format, some coding languages that will help you kind of connect them. I will share this, by the way, in the Discord if you connect, so you can kind of see some of those. Let me skip to the next thing here. I know we're short on my portion of this. Streamline travel and logistics management. Oh man, this was the thing that like kept me up at night when it came out like a week ago. I don't know how many other people thought this. Check this out. Find me the earliest flight to Seattle, Washington, from Austin, Texas, April 25th through the 30th. Then find a hotel. I'm picky. I want continental breakfast. Near the T-Mobile headquarters, that's by where our office is. Reserve a table for dinner that night for 2 people at a Korean barbecue place close by. And lastly, draft an email to Elisha, my coworker, and let him know, invite him to dinner with my itinerary. That's one prompt, and I'm gonna get flight information. This is real. I'm gonna get flight information, sure. Expedia, here's your flight. Okay, here are hotels near the T-Mobile headquarters. This is all one output, by the way. This isn't a back and forth. I know I have about 5 to 7 minutes of Q&A, so I'll kind of combine this with Q&A. Sure, I'll take the question here.
So how do you see users going from search to Bing, ChatGPT, and what would be the consequences of that?
How do we see users going from search, which I think you're thinking Google, which has the primary, seeing a lot of nodding of heads, going to Microsoft, Bing Chat, or other tools like this for search? I think it will be heavily impacting how we search. And I think right now we think we've arrived to this ultimate state of like, this is how we're gonna search from now on. I don't think this is how we're gonna search. I think we're gonna be searching with voice. I think we're gonna be asking naturally, like we're talking now. Hey, I'm gonna be going on the 25th. Are you sure it's the 25th? It's for 5 days. Hey, it's a little cheaper if you go the next day. Yeah, let's do the next day. What about Korean barbecue? What are the reviews? It'll be conversational flows, right? It's the thing we always wanted with Alexa. It's the thing we always wanted with Google. It's the thing we always wanted. For me, I went all in and I got 200 connected devices to HomeKit, Siri, and I can't tell you how disappointed I'm like, please close my shades. It's not working. My kids are screaming at the shades and they're not closing. It's crazy. It's gonna be very natural. I did a proof of concept where I just used natural language to turn into queries that then control my HomeKit. I shouldn't have to do that. That should be built into the tools we use. to answer your question, it's going to be very native to our experiences. I will take a question towards the end on this, if that's okay. Actually, go ahead. I'll take it now.
Yeah, real quick. So was that vanilla GPT 3.5 before, or did you have some of those plugins that you were talking about?
Yes, this is using plugins. So, and again, I want to just talk about things that are accessible today. So yes, I have a paid version of ChatGPT Pro. I pay $20 a month for it. If you're going to do that and pay for it, you have to go request access because this is in an alpha state. But I'll tell you what, OpenAI ships. Like, this is coming in a month. Everyone, the way we're using ChatGPT, plugins will be available to you by the time we meet next month. Maybe. Maybe the month after. But we're talking like a month or two, right? This is going to be available for you. It's available to me now, and you can request it and probably get access within 24 to 48 hours. So personal assistants are available for you now. And I have another section that I will not cover here, but it talks about third-party apps, where I talk about ARPRM, which is a Chrome extension on top of ChatGPT, which gives you lots of really cool templates, 2,900 templates available to use. Like, hey, I want to create a course. I just click on that and say, what's the topic you want to cover? And I hit run, and it gives me that. You can also save your own prompts. This is something I find myself doing all the time. Like, I want to use this one again. I can just save that as a template and leverage it without ever leaving ChatGPT. That's AIPRM, and I have no connection to that. I do have a connection to Brancher.ai. If you're on the basic plan, you do have access to an early version of GPT-4, but a really, really cool product that we built. Merlin is another one, which basically adds it on top of your whole computer. Anywhere you're at, you can highlight something, select it, and then you right-click on it, and it says, what do you want to do with this? Do you want to expand? Do you want to respond? What do you want to do with it? So those are some really, really powerful things. And I will stop there. Thank you very much. Appreciate being able to cover some of that. How much time do I have of Q&A? I have about 3 or 4 minutes of Q&A, so I'll start here. Yes?
Yeah, so with the GPT-4 expanded context window, have you, like, what is that memory, that state memory like? Like, can you feed it the maximum and then feed it the maximum again and feed it the maximum again and recall? Like, how does that work?
So with the expanded capabilities, you're basically saying, how does it work for you to keep the context and the memory of your chats?
Yeah. Like,
something like that?
Can you feed it in blocks of 32,000 tokens?
Can you feed it in blocks of 32,000?
Keep feeding it, and then recall it.
That is per request. That's correct. You can do it per request. That's only through the API, though. So if you're just in ChatGPT, it is expanded, but it's not at that 25,000 words limit. You might want to think about doing that through an API or doing it through other tools that support that. But yes, and I think, again, this is a current limitation. It's going to be relatively, eventually almost limitless the amount of character tokens. Sure.
So if you get a result that you appreciate or that is helpful, can you let it know that you want more of that type of result, and then in a different separate session have it remember that you gave it that feedback?
Got it. So if you get a very good response, and this happens to me all the time, wow, I really love what you finally gave me. It took me 3 or 4 back and forths, but I got a great output. I want you to remember that for the next time. No, they don't have a way to bring that over to the next chat. There are some hacky things that people are doing. It doesn't always work. I just tried this yesterday, and it worked once, and it didn't work 6 times. But I said, can you compress this into a format that you can understand in another chat? And I said, yes. And they gave me a single paragraph of just random characters and numbers. And then I brought that into a chat, and I said, hey, can you tell me what our chat was about? And it was in a completely different chat window, and it remembered exactly what I had said in that. So I think they're working on that. I think that's still an opportunity. That is a limitation, so you understand. So like when we talk about, yes, it's really powerful, there are some limitations. This is one that I think we're going to see some huge improvements on. All right, I'll take 2 more questions. This one here.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about Brancher.ai. Can you talk to, like, are you guys using Hugging or, and then what models do y'all combine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Elisha, who's in the back there, if you can raise your hand, definitely talk to him in the networking. He's the guy that's leading the development around Brancher. But to answer your question, we ultimately want to be agnostic as to which models we connect to. Currently, we're at GPT 3.5 Turbo, and we are at GPT 4 if you're on a specific plan. We also have Dolly integration, and we intend to go through probably Replicate to connect to Stable Diffusion, Open Journey, which is a version of Midjourney since there's no API there, and we're going to continue to expand that. We're actually really interested in plugins right now because not only are the people building plugins, but they're building availability to the APIs, and so we're thinking about other ways to kind of build things. But Brancher is like, as it relates to the models, we're going to continue to build that, but we're also going to continue to build inputs. What this is basically is like you create a Google form, and at the end of it, you're getting like a really good output. And right now, it's like form-based, and it can be a drop-down, it could be an input, but we're going to eventually do things like upload an audio, or connect a YouTube video to this thing, or tell it what your flight information is, and it can do the Expedia search stuff that I just showed you, and then output actual rich media and links that you can go and actually do something with. So it is powerful. It's interesting because we haven't had a lot of requests for new models. A lot of people are just like, wow, this is really cool. Can I just take away the branding? And hey, can I use this and share this with somebody that doesn't have an account? And they're more interested in expanding, like, I don't know, Elisha, what, 80, 90% are just interested in GPT and not really interested in the image part yet. So I think as we continue to expand that, that'll add more opportunities. All right, and I think you had your hand up first, yep.
When the language models are being trained off of internet,
Yes.
that is being built by people incentivized by advertising, what happens when people stop creating that content because no one's going to those sources?
Could you say that one more time? I think I caught most of that.
A lot of the data that's being summarized
Yes.
is coming from the internet.
Yes.
It's being generated by people who are hoping people show up at their websites and click on their advertising.
Yes.
So with so much summarization happening, no one going to those websites,
Got it.
isn't the source going to dry up?
Yeah, so the question is, won't the source dry up? Because people are probably going to be searching for things like Fresh Consulting in their chat window and not going to the sites or to the bigger companies that might have ads, and they're losing ad revenue. That's already happening, and it's true, and it will need to be reinvented. And it's going to continue to happen, like especially if we go to something that's not interface-based, like a digital interface that has a UI to it, and it's like a voice, an invisible UI. We don't want to be hearing ads on that, right? We're used to that with podcasts, but we want to buy out of that, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But it's true. A lot of companies are being affected. I mean, Google for sure is being affected as it relates to the fact that they're the biggest search engine in the world, and they heavily rely on ads, right? So they are heavily impacted. It'll be really interesting to see what that evolved Google looks like in 1 year from now. It will be very interesting. We'll have a different conversation. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop. I appreciate the questions. I'll be sticking around, and I'll be at the kind of networking at Lester Borough if you have any more questions. But also connect on Discord. Like, I think a lot of you have lots of insights and have really unique ways. Like, there's some things I was sharing that people are like, oh yeah, I've done that. Please connect with others. There's a lot of people doing interesting things there, so definitely encourage that. The Discord link will be put up as a QR code. I don't think it's like a very easy link to remember. It's like characters. So we'll make sure to put that up. Thank you for asking that. But yeah, we'll put that back up. It's something we just created today, but we want to be really active and allow people to kind of communicate. All right, thank you so much.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our second speaker, Dr. Joseph Gartner, who will speak on the AI's role of closing the health equality gap. And a little bit about Dr. Gartner. He's a director of data science for ClosedLoop.ai. Joseph loves building models that have a real-world impact and thinking about the bridge between math to reality. And in his spare time, look out, he's learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and is enjoying the beautiful city that we have here in Austin, Texas. So without further ado, let's give it up for Dr. Joseph Gartner.
Thanks for your time today. Really excited to talk to you about AI and what we can do to maybe make the world a little bit better with these technologies. It's something that I get the opportunity to talk about kind of a lot because I think it's a really important topic, and there's a lot of people that want to listen to me talk about it, which is nice. So just to kind of bomb through, just give a little structure here, I'm going to tee the problem up a little bit and talk about, like, how big is this problem? Is it something that's worth talking about on a Wednesday night when there's a lot of other interesting things competing against this? And kind of go through a few other topics. I've reserved the last part because I appreciate that not everyone in here is working in healthcare or particularly cares about building technology for healthcare. What I'd like to do is try to draw some parallels of what we talk about during the course of this talk and try to maybe think about how those tendrils might expand into things that you do care about, interact with, and work, and try to think of ways that you might apply to your work. So, health and equity. The fact of the matter is that the American healthcare system is not, sheltered from the biases that affect our society, right? Just as people of color and socioeconomically disadvantaged people have a hard walk in other aspects, health is no different. If we're thinking about how big of a problem it is, they estimate that between 2003 and 2006, about a third of care that was provided to minorities were just because of disparities, right? So we're doing extra ER use, we're having extra days in inpatient settings, and those costs add up. They add up that we, taxpayers are paying about $1.2 trillion over a 3-year period because of it. So if you're thinking, hey, this isn't my problem, you're wrong. It is your problem and it is affecting you deeply. Significantly more importantly, we're losing about 1 million people a year, 20% lower than that, so I won't be too hyperbolic, but about 800,000 people a year are dying because of this. So if I haven't grabbed your attention yet, you may be asleep, but it is a very, very big problem, and it is something that's worth kind of spending time about, working on and trying to kind of get better about. So in order to kind of approach this problem as a technologist, we need to have a better understanding. Luckily, healthcare experts have kind of segmented up the actual problem into kind of more digestible sections. And when we think about trying to attack the problem of our health, it's a known fact that a lot of what affects our overall health doesn't happen within the healthcare system, right? My weight, my eating patterns, my exercise patterns, my mental health, a lot of that is affected not because of the 30 minutes a month I spend with my doctor or that 1 hour that I go to the ER. That's a small portion of what determines my overall health. So if we realize that there are a lot of drivers of what causes inequity in our health and health care, we also have to recognize that the solutions aren't going to be a silver bullet and there's no kind of one-shot answer to solving the problem. So as we kind of dig into this, if we're thinking about kind of a multifaceted approach to the problems that face people for getting equal and unbiased health care, what we need to do is attack this on multiple fronts. We have things like education. This is a cornerstone of chronic disease management, not just for health equity, but for people who are dealing with diabetes, people who are dealing with COPD. Try to wrap your mind around dealing with a mental illness and having a chronic disease, right? That becomes an extraordinarily large problem to try to deal with. Things that are like really deadly simple, dealing with access issues. Hey, do you not have the ability to get to your primary care provider because you don't have a car? If I buy you an Uber ride that costs me $30, will that save you 2 trips to the ER in the next month? Yeah? Great. That's a good investment of $30 to get you over to your PCP, right? Health concierge programs, right? If you're dealing with something that's novel or new and you have to kind of navigate what has become a very complicated healthcare system, if you're from a disadvantaged state, it is demonstrated and proven, you have a harder time kind of walking that road, right? So all of these programs have one thing in common in that they're expensive to apply to everyone. We cannot roll these things out to every single person in the world. We can't roll these things out to even just those people that are from some protected group. So they're examples of programs that benefit from targeting, right? I identify some people that I think are in particular need using some type of algorithmic approach, and I'm doling out some benefit based on a score that I can create, right? Perfect application of AI, and it helps out a lot. So that's just kind of teeing up what we can do. Now kind of getting into, well, okay, that last statement of risk stratifying using AI, that's true kind of agnostic to a desire to drive health equity, drive kind of greater fairness within our society, right? So so why in particular is this application of AI something that's provocative when we think about the idea of bias and fairness? So one of the potentials of AI is the idea of creating a way of scoring people, of risk adjudicating people free of bias, right? If I put the same inputs to a model, regardless of the time of day, regardless of whether my dog was wagging their tail when I got home or giving me a frowny face because I didn't give them enough treats, it's going to give me the same score that goes in, same input, same output. And that's the promise of AI. I think that we've found, because there have been many, many prominent examples, that promise isn't always fulfilled, right? That there are some times where that's kind of drawn short. I'd like to, and again, I'm trying to keep this high level, but this is about as technical as I'm going to get. The diagram on the left is a pretty common depiction of ways that data scientists and AI practitioners think about error types, right? So there's a couple ways that you can get things wrong. You can be really consistent, but just off the mark, or you can kind of be wildly scattered about. And the two error types at times are thought of as being equally pervasive, particularly when we start thinking about these types of problems. I'm going to make a pretty strong argument that that's actually really not the case. That in fact, and this is actually the point that Daniel Kahneman was making in his book Noise, is that kind of having that wide scatter is significantly more detrimental to individuals than having a tight grouping that's slightly shifted off the mark. And so the takeaway here is just that as we're endeavoring to move forward and endeavoring to leverage these technologies for kind of an even application within our society, it is effortful, and there is going to be a very measured approach that we're going to have to take and think about as we go into this. I kind of alluded to the fact that there's this promise of kind of AI working in a way that is not going to harm people. There's a lot of examples from outside the field of healthcare. My colleague Juan and I tend to focus on healthcare because it's the thing that we work on all day, every day. But it turns out that there are a lot of examples where AI has kind of really fallen short of its use. And again, the problem is because these algorithms are so helpful in doing targeted approaches, it tends to have the opposite effect. Now, I can take a step back and tell you, I've never met an AI practitioner who's working on these types of things that has any malice in their heart, or is trying to go out and being like, yeah, I'm just really going out there and trying to help this one group and screw everybody else, right? Like, there's nobody that's trying to do that. We are also well past the era where it's acceptable to be like accidentally harming people. We know about it, it's been widely publicized, and it's now kind of in the moment now where you don't get credit for not knowing. You have to be checking, you have to be making sure that things are working well and working in accordance with kind of your moral compass. Here what we have is a kind of a typical way that this would kind of come into effect. And again, trying to kind of avoid too much of the details. But on the left, what we have is the performance of a widely used, like across the country model for determining what a patient's future health outcomes will be. And oftentimes the way that that's quantified is future medical costs. It's pretty intuitive why we might think that, right? If I have an inpatient episode, that's amongst the most expensive things that will happen to me when I interact with the healthcare system. It's also the thing that we try to avoid, right? I don't want to spend nights in the hospital. I don't want to go use the ER. Those things are all considered kind of emergency things that we really don't want to be using very much. So it's pretty natural to think of how I would capture a lot that's happening to me within the healthcare system, rolling it up into a single number and saying, okay, if somebody's high cost over the next few months, that means something bad's going on, I need to go talk to them. The issue happens when we look at the difference in utilization between people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged versus their counterparts, right? And we'll get into this a little bit more, but when we flip the script and say, hey, if we take those same predictions and instead look at what is the chronic disease burden that individuals are carrying at a particular level of risk, what we see is, in the curve depicted by purple, that black individuals are significantly sicker, they're higher than the curve represented by white people, right? And so this is a pretty subtle and nuanced way of looking at how we're affecting, but at the end of the day, in order to be afforded help, which means that you are to the right of that dashed line, in order to be afforded help, you have to be significantly sicker than your already disadvantaged counterparts, right? So this model, probably built by somebody who was trying to help the world, ended up going out and taking a problem and widening the gap. Kind of a bummer. So the thing that's really exciting is that in the wake of a lot of very regrettable missteps, there is a wide body of research surrounding algorithmic bias and fairness. And I will tell you that if anybody tells you that this is a simple problem to solve, they are selling you something. It is not an easy problem to solve. I'd love to have kind of like one little metric that I put up on the screen, like, oh, just measure this and you're great. No, it turns out that what you have to do is take a lot of different looks at how your model performs, what's being input to models, what it's basing on. So this framework is not something that we invented. It comes from a paper by two authors, Paulus and Kent are their last names. I don't know their first names. And it does a nice job of kind of separating out concepts like polar versus non-polar decisions, bias and fairness. I really highly recommend reading the paper because again, if we're talking about kind of general frameworks that apply to ways that we think about these problems, I think that the general framework that they lay out is extraordinarily useful. I'm not going to get into the kind of nitty-gritty of this because I think the flavor of this forum is a little bit higher level. But what we'll do is kind of walk through examples of what these changes would look like and how it might affect kind of how I think about building and operating things. Okay, yeah, so we'll walk through an illustration. And so again, kind of circling back to this kind of unfortunate algorithm, if I were to kind of go in and, this is my V1 of the model. I'm kind of working with a new healthcare client I produced that, and I look and I say, oh, fiddlesticks, like that's not something I'm ever going to put out in the real world because that's harming people and I don't want to do that. Well, what am I going to do to fix it, right? And again, I know that it's a pretty complicated answer, but what I'm going to do is kind of boil it down to three kind of simpler things of zoom in, remove bias-driving features, and measure fairness well, right? So what do I mean by zooming in? So one of our clients has a kind of coverage area that's quite expansive. And so if I look at a global population composition of the races of individuals that they work with, they have a composition of individuals that more or less mirrors the kind of American demographic distribution, right? If I look at the country as a whole. This may make us think, okay, great, if I'm building models here, I should be pretty good from kind of sub-market to sub-market where I think about applying this model. The issue is that within these great United States, there is an extraordinary amount of variance as far as what the composition of demographics are, right? So if we look on the top, I'm kind of blanking them out. I don't know why I'm protecting the composition of states, but I'm a little paranoid about sharing details. The top we can see that the group is extraordinarily homogeneous. It's mostly white folks. There are some folks in other groups, but we're talking about kind of a level of dominance that it's really kind of one flavor of human beings that you're looking at there. If we go into sub-market 2, what we can see is this is a significantly more diverse market, and again, on a level of parity that's like, kind of not consistent with global population statistics, right? I should say, when I say global, I mean the United States, because that's the only place this organization operates in, right? So if I'm kind of thinking about by way of analogy, when we think about models, we have to think about the areas and the environments in which they're developed. There's a concept within psychology called weird, where most studies that grad students do for psychology don't apply to the real world because they're training they're doing all their studies on college students that they're paying with pizza and kind of like $5 for beer money, right? And so the concept of weird is Western, educated, industrial, rich, democratic, right? And so if I take a bunch of college students and come in and test how they respond to things like shock and trauma and fear, and then I go to apply that to, say, the inner city where they are constantly bombarded by shock, trauma, and fear, it turns out that those new models don't reply well, right? The same should go for, and does go for, machine learning models and these types of algorithms, right? If I create these things in a bubble, in a vacuum, and then I go and let them out in the world, it's not a surprise that they don't work well. That is a design characteristic at that point. And I, particularly within the context of healthcare, a lot of what happens is it will happen at Johns Hopkins or the Mayo Clinic or MD Anderson, right? They'll come up with these fantastic models, and then they won't bother to retrain them when they go and take and apply them in Oklahoma City, right? So it's not a great idea, and it's not a great approach. Remove bias-driving features. So I kind of walking through the example of these two digital twins. The individual on the left has a $1,500 overnight inpatient stay for uncontrolled asthma, right? After they're discharged, they schedule a follow-up with their primary care physician and see them within 10 days of hospital follow-up, which is what you should do. Everybody here, if everybody just internally say to yourself, if I'm ever in the hospital, call my primary care doctor, regardless of somebody tells me to do. It's like one of the best things that you can do to like change the locus of your long-term health care. Anyway, that visit has a $150 cost. Your primary care doctor identifies that your asthma medication just isn't doing the trick for you anymore. They give you a prescription for a nebulizer, which is a big fancy machine that kind of aerolizes heavier duty your asthma medicine and sets you straight, right? Digital counterpart 2 goes into the hospital, same exact overnight stay, $1,500, right? Then the next day, they can't get off work because they work an hourly job and they just had a $1,500 overnight hospital stay. So they don't go to see their primary care doctor. They do go refill their asthma inhaler, the same thing that wasn't working or keeping them out of the hospital for $35. The person on the left has a total cost during this episode of $1,725. The person on the right is $1,535. The basic question to you is, which of these two individuals is higher risk? Yeah, the person on the right. Now, if I use that really intuitive variable of cost as a proxy for health risk, who would a model learn is the riskier person? Exactly. This type of examination is not obvious or intuitive, right? There are so many people making this mistake for such a long time because it really does take digging down into those frameworks and thinking about this. I promise you, there's so many smart people that dug into this problem before this and thought, yeah, as you get sicker, your healthcare spirals out of control. But this is the exact type of characteristic that sounds like a good idea in practice, and if you don't look at it and you don't measure it, it can have disastrous results. This isn't the only characteristic that you can put into a healthcare model that has really ill-intended effects. Again, trying to put a little bit of a happier glint on the talk. The other side of the coin is you can start to think about the problem and measure characteristics about patients that are the barriers to health, right? If I'm thinking about my patients, one thing that may be very informative is the distance between their home and their most frequently used pharmacy, right? I'll admit, I'm pretty lazy, and if I wasn't driving by a Walgreens every day, I might never ever pick up my medications, but luckily there's one right around the corner, right? Now, if I don't own a car and I'm 2 miles from that Walgreens and I have kids, the probability that I'm going to have a free hour to transfer 2 buses to get over there and then come back is pretty low, right? So we can start engineering in features of saying, hey, this person's at risk because they're in an area where a low percentage of people own cars, and they're far from the resources that they use in order to take care of themselves. Again, when we talk about connecting it to programs of interventions, and we think about features that bubble up within models to show us what's going on and what's driving the risk stratification of an individual, that's a pretty obvious fix. If I'm, you know, as care managers, they have hard jobs, and I try not to dog them. That person pops up on my stream. This person has 3 medications. They have low adherence. They're far from their pharmacy, and they don't own a car. If they can't fix that problem, they don't need AI. They need bigger help than I can provide. So the last one is measure fairness well. This is kind of the double-sided knife of, or double-sided blade of kind of this emergent field of AI bias. As we look at the ways that we measure it, there are many, many, many ways of characterizing bias and fairness for a particular model, right? And the one thing that I would definitely say is guidelines surrounding when and where you should use one metric over the other are lacking, because again, it is still something that I think is emergent, and I think that we're still kind of working on getting better here. The consequence there is, as you're building these things, there's no silver bullet, right? And I think back to kind of Watson, of having kind of this like AI framework, where Watson was proposed to be a general purpose AI tool that could be applied pretty agnostic to industry and across everything. And they had one metric for measuring model bias. And it was basically, you would group up people by subgroup, and you would make sure that the algorithm was predicting at the same rate that a person should be kind of targeted for improvement, right? And I've seen people use this. Now, again, if we go back to kind of our subpopulations, and again, we're going by rates, so it'll scale with the different size of folks, right? And I'm trying to predict, say, heavy ER utilization, right? Now, it's pretty intuitive. Oh, hey, like, if my algorithm is under-predicting that Black people will use the ER, we need to really address that, and we need to kind of figure out, and maybe we'll just correct our algorithm a little bit to increase their risk scores. What happens if your algorithm predicts that Black people are going to use the ER more than white people, right? Do you correct down the other way? I've seen people who've tried to do that. It turns out that because of inequities, Black people use the ER more often than their white counterparts, and probably need to be targeted for intervention at a higher rate, right? But if you think of targeting these problems within models as a one-stop shop, you're on a pathway to folly, right? When we were approached with this problem, that's why I'm wearing this silly belt buckle. We can talk about that in another session. When we were approached by CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Studies, to think about this problem, we looked at the literature. We came up with a metric that was a maybe more intuitive view, but hadn't existed in literature based on my findings. We call it group benefit equality, and it's a simple ratio. Is the amount of care we're giving out proportional to that subgroup's need, right? So if a group has some bad thing happening to them more frequently than others, we should be giving them more help. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Allows for the same corrections that I discussed, and you can kind of scale things so that you're giving appropriate allocations of resources in the case that you find that you're underservicing a protected community. And again, it's more complicated than that. You know, if we kind of go back to frameworks, there are certainly a lot more things that we look at when we're building our models, and there's a lot deeper analysis that we endeavor to go through. But at the end of the day, I think I edited it, yeah. So what we're left with at Closed Loop are models that look like this, where the lines overlap and they have bars, right? And then we can get back to the idea that we are finding people who are underserved in the healthcare system. We are having people proactively reach out to them, get them on a track of care, and really change the needle of of where they're going from a healthcare journey. Again, I appreciate that probably not all of us are working in healthcare, and even those of us who aren't, maybe not even terribly interested in healthcare other than to give me a kind ear and give me the time of day. I don't think that, while healthcare has become a passion of mine over the kind of the time that I've worked here at Closed Loop, and it is a field that it's not hard to kind of get fired up about because you really are talking about kind of human lives, humanity and kind of pretty basic things. I think that there's a lot of room to think about these frameworks and think about how that you can solve larger problems in a similar way. One of the interesting things, I don't think that you're allowed to speak in this forum without mentioning ChatGPT. We're only two meetings in, but I might imagine. One thing that they've done from an interesting standpoint is that they've kind of baked these types of things into their framework, where they know about kind of, the model has learned what kind of concepts of things that you shouldn't talk about and should talk about are, and really don't want to kind of be echoing some of the awful things that are posted on the internet, right? I think if we think about kind of other applications and things of this nature, there's a lot of opportunity here, but we do need to kind of really think critically. One thing that, one undercurrent that isn't kind of brought up in the previous parts of the talk is that the American healthcare system is heavily subsidized, right? A lot of money comes from government funding, and a lot of the interest in health equity from kind of large organizations comes from the fact that they are financially incentivized to do so, right? A lot of folks kind of contributing to this and kind of pushing on this come from a kind of wide array of backgrounds. I alluded to kind of interacting with the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Studies. I think CMS had a big kind of part of its care or attention pushed towards health equity by Senator Cory Booker, right? He and a few other senators that were kind of looking at their constituencies and looking at kind of the problems that were affecting them, kind of really stood up and came to CMS and said, like, hey, I'm not a data scientist, I'm not an analyst, I'm just a lowly senator, but I think we can do better, right? And I know that we have kind of a mixed audience here as far as kind of technologists, marketers, whatever your job title is. And so sometimes it may think, well, this is a bit daunting and I really can't get engaged here. I do think that that's not true. I think that anybody can really kind of dig in if you think about the implications of these things and really try to kind of, bend the needle, think about how these things can be applied for good. And yeah, that's it.
So are there any studies of completeness or relevance of the model of the data that trains the AI and exposing that measure to the users so that they are informed of what biases went into training the model?
If I can kind of say back, is it well understood or well studied of kind of what drives kind of biases in the case of that particular model or models in general? I would say that, so that model was predicting cost and used cost as an input. So the kind of cultural taboo of using and predicting cost has become pretty well known, and that study, in fact, was a study that kind of shed light on that particular fact. The fact of the matter is there's no kind of like universal answer for what drives bias in models and what doesn't, right? And again, the really nasty thing is a fair model in one area may be unfair elsewhere, right? If you have a particular area where individuals based on various groups have similar kind of health system utilization, I can probably build a both accurate and unbiased model only looking at their medical history, right? So if there's a city has really kind of driven down access to barriers to healthcare, and that there really is a lot of health equity, and I build a model there, then I build in an assumption that, okay, I can really base these just on what I see from medical records alone. You go to a second place where that isn't the case, and there are kind of access gaps that run along either racial or socioeconomic lines, then that same assumption that I can trust your diagnosis history, you might have undiagnosed COPD. You may have undiagnosed diabetes, right? Those are really bad things to be undiagnosed, right? And if you have a model that's invisible to the fact that that may affect certain groups more often than not, that's a real problem, right? So the answer is no, and I don't think it is possible to ever write a paper that does because of that problem.
That topic is really interesting. Thank you. It struck me how the whole conversation was around cost and utilization. It feels like a very American way to think about it. I'm curious to hear if European countries use similar cost-based models, or if there are other, end metrics about, I don't know, maybe like health span or lifespan that are used in other places in the world.
Great question. And in fact, I had the simplified view of kind of what we do. We, in general, as a practice, don't predict cost. So the events that we primarily predict, if I'm taking, hey, I have 100,000 people I'm in charge of, I need to try to take care of them, we predict unplanned hospital admissions, right? So it's not even all hospital admissions. There's a really complicated set logic that we literally have to sit down at a whiteboard every time that we want to understand for what exactly characterizes an unplanned hospital admission. But basically, it's a subset of diagnoses and procedures that you never kind of call ahead and say, hey, I'm coming in for unchecked asthma, right? And so that's the thing that we end up predicting. It turns out that as an outcome, and particularly as a way of kind of quantifying unmet healthcare needs, it doesn't matter how busy you are, how much time you work. If you're having a hospital, you go to the big box, right? And so that's a significantly better way of characterizing future risk for an individual.
Right, but are there, because you had a great example of, the person who follows up with their doctor is, going to have a lower long-term cost, right? So, I'm just curious if there's other, how does Britain measure this,
So quick answer, I don't know. Because of healthcare data sharing agreements and things like that, I only work in the American healthcare system. One thing that you kind of brought up is the digital twin example. So I used cost as an example there of a no-no feature. One way that I would think about flipping on its head is I had an admission without a follow-up visit, right? So if I'm thinking about, basic feature or feature creation, I'm counting things, right? So I count inpatient admissions. Instead of just counting inpatient admissions, count them into two buckets of inpatient admissions with follow-up and inpatient admissions without follow-up, right? All of a sudden now I'm tracking separately this thing of, oh, hey, there's this really bad thing without any evidence of that person being on a good good track of care. Then I can kind of go in and think about trying to get in there. Again, it's the idea that you have to kind of you have to peel the onion a bit to kind of get away from obvious variables to things that are actually kind of trying to get at the core of the problem that you're trying to solve. On the couch?
Yeah, I think you might be a little overly generous with how you portray the AI technology currently used in the healthcare system in the US, particularly because recently there was a report from ProPublica about Cigna and among other insurance companies using AI as an automatic denial of coverage for various routine things that would be prevented in the case of long-term healthcare.
Yeah, I saw that article and was also pretty dismayed and pretty unhappy about that. And it's certainly, at the end of the day, there's a lot of people using these tools specifically to drive, better returns on investment, better cost. Hey, we're a business. When we talk about preventing, unforeseen or unwanted healthcare outcomes, we do talk about cost savings associated with it. And I don't work for free. I am a well-paid individual and intend to continue being a well-paid individual. It really boils down to kind of that last point of you have to think about the implications of your algorithms. If there's a potential for harm, we really should be thinking about human decision augmentation, not replacement. in the, for those cases. The way that I would take that same scenario and flip it on its head, and the way that we approach something like that is, instead of automatic denials, automatic approvals. If I say like, hey, I have soft tissue damage on my knee because I do jujitsu, and I know what happens to me, and I know that I don't have a bone injury, I have a ligament injury, wouldn't it be nice that I don't have to go to see my doctor, then get an x-ray, then get an MRI to finally get a CT scan, right? If there were some way to say, oh, hey, that's 3 unneeded visits and 2 unneeded doses of radiation, that I can just skip the queue to the thing that I actually need and know I need, and clearly can articulate the reason that I need it, oh, well then but the fact of the matter is, those checks and safeguards are in place because a lot of people come in and they're like, oh, my knee hurts and I don't know what happened, but I think I need a CT scan. It's like, well, let's see if you have a chipped bone, and like, let's go through the hierarchy of less invasive, less harmful things, right? So again, same way of thinking about like, hey, let's automate these mundane tasks that cause a lot of cost. There's a ton of paperwork associated with it. Yeah, let's get rid of some, but let's get rid of some where we're erring on the side of like really not hurting people. One more question? Cool. I got you, man.
I was curious your thoughts about like next best action systems in AI healthcare, where they're saying like, oh, well, based on your medical history, this is the next thing for you guys. Do you see that as sort of coming into fruition anytime soon, or is that kind of still a ways off?
Yeah, I think we've been involved with those types of things, and we've kind of seen things like that. I actually have a pretty personal anecdote about that. I played rugby before I did jiu-jitsu because I'm a dummy and I just like beating myself up. And I had a game one weekend, and I went into work on Monday. I'm like, man, my knee really hurts, but I don't remember like getting hit or anything. And like the dummy I am, I kind of sat on it until Wednesday, at which point my partner was like, you should go to the doctor because that's not reasonable or natural. And I went into the doctor, and I kind of just described it. I'm like, yeah, I got some like vague knee pain, like right around here. And the doc's eyes just like lit up, and they're like, you are going to upstairs to imaging, you're going to the front of the ultrasound line, and you are getting imaged right now. And I was like, I just played a rugby game, like, and my knee hurts. Like, I'm asking for like bigger Advil than I can get at the pharmacist. And she's like, no, go up there, don't be a dummy. Just go up there and get a scan. It turns out that I had what appeared from the image to be a blockage in my vein. So what I was experiencing may or may not have been a deep vein thrombosis. When I come down, it turns out that's not something that most primary care physicians encounter every single day. And my doctor was searching the med archive of what to do in the case that you have a patient with that. I gotta be honest with you, like as a patient, there's not a lot of things that you can encounter that are scarier than watching your doctor Google what you have. But I just kind of sat there and took it like a champ. I'm like, well, what else am I gonna do? To answer you kind of more humanly, I wouldn't be terribly excited about seeing my doctor asking ChatGPT advice on what's to be doing next. As far as kind of the maturity of those systems and where we're at, and I see where we're at time, so I'll stop my yammering. I'd say that they're probably at least a year or two out from being like really, the gold standard that I have is would I have the model applied to my family, and I would not have it applied to my mom or dad right now. So for me, it's a no. I think they'll get there. It's a pretty challenging problem. We can talk about kind of why next door over a beer.
All right. Well, thank you so much for making it. Thank you so much. Let's give it another big round of applause to Dr. Joseph Gartner. Fascinating discussion. Another round of applause for Johnny Rodriguez as well.